Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Laura Crofutt. Formerly, maiden name was Hayton, and before and after that, I was Laura Hayton, then Abime, then Crofutt. Yes, we'll get into that story later on. I was born and raised in Leon, and actually around Leon. A little bit of that was in Osceola, Iowa, Murray, Iowa. Then I graduated high school from Leon, Iowa. However, I'm getting ahead of myself a bit. At the age of 4, I was the oldest, and my brother, who was 16 months younger than myself, contracted leukemia. At that time, all there was for treatment was lots of steroids. His little face just got bigger and bigger and bigger, you know, those little round, cute little baby cheeks. And I was very close to him, or I thought I was. My baby book even indicates how that I was going to be the mothering type and was a very good mother to him and took very good care of him. And then a little later, I had another brother come. He's 3 years younger than myself. His name is Thomas, which some of you might know, or Tom. He's a little different in the head. Oh my, he's way out there. Let me just say it this way. My brother Tom has an IQ of 162.
Oh, wow.
But you would never know it. You would think it was more like 90, because his wisdom and wise ways are not there. We'll go into that another time too. When I was 4 years old, 4 or 5, I was introduced to my great grandma Blakesley, and I absolutely loved her. We called her Little Grandma. And every once in a while, Jan might ask me, or somebody would ask me, what was Little Grandma's real name? And I go, I don't know. I just know her as Little Grandma Blakesley. And she was very tiny. And the reason that she said I was her favorite great-great-grandchild, well, I was the first great-great-grandchild, so I guess that was why. But she said because when I would sit on her lap, I would not wiggle. All the other kids, they wiggled, as a child is supposed to. So I would make sure that I sat there very still, because I wanted to enjoy as much of her time as possible. So what happened in November of my 6th year, when I was in 1st grade, my brother, Gary, who had leukemia, and little grandma both went to heaven the same day. Everybody told me that little grandma was taking Gary to heaven. So I was like, okay, I can understand that. However, April rolls around, and my best friend, her name was Elizabeth. And to this day, Elizabeth is just a very fond name to me. Very, very dear. She and I, her parents allowed her to finally come out of the house for the winter, for she had diabetes and was their only child. They allowed her to come out, and we played on our porch, and we played house. Remember that? Mud pies and house. Oh, I love making mud pies, and to this day I'm terrified of mud. I don't know what the deal is now. But I think Grandma Blakesley made me terrified of mud, because she would laugh whenever I got stuck in the creek or the river. And she'd just laugh at me, and I go, it's quicksand, Grandma! Anyway, that's another story. I swore all those cowboy movies when everybody was drowning in quicksand. Yeah, it was really in Decatur County. I knew it. Anyway, Elizabeth came over to play house. And I wanted to be the little kid first. And she wanted to be the little kid. I said, okay, I'll be the mom first. So I go and I'm standing there pretending like I'm cooking. And I said, Elizabeth, it's time for supper. And I turn and I look at Elizabeth, and she won't get up. And I went storming in the house, and I said, Mom, Elizabeth stopped playing fair. Elizabeth had died. My mother scooped her up, and my mom had just given birth to my baby sister just a few weeks prior to that. Scooped her up and ran 3 blocks to the hospital in Osceola, carrying Elizabeth. And I still remember hearing her yell. And so death found me very young, and I went into a recluse type state until I was a sophomore in high school. I was very quiet. Except for around my brother and sister. Oh my, yeah, I was a boss. I was a bossy boss. Sister, I was always telling them, hurry up and get your work done. Get your chores done. Hurry up, Mom's going to be home pretty soon. We got to have our chores done. And then we'd call Mom at the hospital. She was a nurse at the hospital in Decatur County in Leon, and she would say, are you bleeding? No. Are you dead yet? No. Goodbye. And how many times did Mom tell us, don't call her at work? But sometimes it would just get to the point that we just had to call Mom because I couldn't get my brother or sister to do what they were supposed to. Every day that she worked, that happened. Poor Mom. Didn't matter how many times she told us. Anyway, when I was a sophomore in high school, lots of little things happened. And one of them was a foreign exchange student that was staying with Don and Ruth McGahey. There in Leon, we were going to the Leon church. I hated being a teenager. And I remember she was from Greece, Marie, and she sat there with me on the steps because I didn't want to go into the church. And she told me how wonderful it was to be a teenager. And all these wonderful things. And I thought, oh, well, nobody had ever told me that there was wonderful things that could happen in life. And I was like, how exciting is that? And it put a whole different perspective on my life. And yes, I went to church with my mom and dad, especially my dad, every Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday nights. And I thought, though, my dad walked on water. I later found out he did not. But maybe ice water, frozen. Maybe that was it. No. I started going to church camps when I was in junior high. 4-H camp, church camps, and Girl Scout camps. Absolutely loved camps. It got me away from everybody and away from the house. Loved it. Wasn't growing anything spiritually in me, except for the one time where I've shared before when I was standing here in the sanctuary one time during a senior retreat, and they told us, we can't go in the sanctuary. We can run around anywhere else in the church, but you can't run around in the sanctuary. And I remember standing there thinking, I'm going to be up there someday. Women weren't allowed in the priesthood then. And I thought, I'm going to be there someday. However, shatters came again. And I'm going to use real names. Paula Edwards and I were very close. We were very good friends. She of course went to school in Lamoni, and I went to school in Leon, but church really brought us together. Our retreats, our camps. And when I was a sophomore in high school, suddenly she told me her mom would not allow her to be around me anymore. And I asked her why. And she said, because of your dad. I said, what's wrong with my dad? You know, all kids. What's wrong with your dad? Especially a little girl that's looking up to their dad. He's done some bad things. And my mom is afraid that you will do those same bad things and I can't be around you. I was devastated. And I stepped away from the church for a while. I would go with my mom and dad, but I wasn't there mentally. I wasn't there spiritually. It wasn't there. When I was a senior, or no, it was between my junior and senior year, I was very blessed to get to go to Upward Bound. And I do wish they still had Upward Bound at Graceland. I cannot tell you how many kids really, really benefited that I know with Upward Bound. It gave me a few credits for college to get started. It gave me the college experience. However, I hated it because my roommates, I went through 3 roommates that summer. And it wasn't that many weeks because my roommates kept stealing my money. And I was like, wait a minute, this is a church-owned college. Hello? So again, I was being, I guess, on trial. I don't know what the deal was. Finally, they didn't give me a roommate at all. I was like, oh, what's wrong with me? Oh, dear. And that's okay, because I won the student of, they had a female and a male student of the class or something. I can't remember what it was, and we won a trip to Des Moines for a night at the, what was that, Circle Hotel, Holiday Inn?
Yeah, the Holiday Inn, up on the top of it.
Yeah, the top, the restaurant went around and around,
Holiday Inn, yeah.
and a movie. We thought we were just a cat's meow, and a trip to Tarkio to the play, and we were like, oh wow, this is really cool. So I guess I was doing something right at Upward Bound, but it really taught me a lot. And I still remember when I graduated high school, Bill Dudak, Coach Dudak, calling me and saying, you've got to come to Graceland, you've got to sign up, you've got to sign up, you've got to come to Graceland, you've got to come to Graceland. And I kept saying, why? When I graduated from high school, Decatur County Hospital paid for my way to go to the EMT school at Creston, and I was making more money at that time than my dad. And I told Bill, why should I go to Graceland when I'm already making more money than my dad? And he didn't have an answer. I did not go to nursing. I dreamed of being a nurse, and all of a sudden, to me, I thought money was more important, because when Paula Edwards told me about what her mom said, in my mind, I thought the bad things that my dad did had to do with being poor, being in a lower income bracket. I didn't think it was other things that he could have possibly done that he did. And some of you may know those things. I later found out after he died some of those things that he did, and I still have a little bit of anger toward that, and I'm working through that. But I'm very, very grateful for the life, the spirit life of God and Christ that my dad instilled in me, and the love and the patience that my mother instilled in me. During that time, I also had my, at that time called Patriarchal Blessing. Clarence Bohall did it, and I remember him very sternly saying, Laura, you have to really pray and study about this. And I'm like, okay, yeah, sure, okay, yeah, sure. You know, I'm 19, 20 years old. I have lots of things to see, lots of things to do, lots of play time. I'm suddenly free. So, yeah, sure, I'm going to study and pray. And he finally did my patriarchal blessing. I was like, okay. But I remember one thing that it did say was it talked about that I would be the eagle on top of the mountaintop looking down, and every once in a while would be that person that would fly down and help. But I was not going to be that person that was there helping on a 24/7 basis. I was like, oh, I thought I would be, darn it. Okay, so we go on.
Were you still living at home at that time?
Well, my father said the minute that we graduate, we have to get out. So even though I was working, I had an apartment. My first apartment was over my great-grandfather, Paul Walter Blakesley, had an apartment in the upstairs of his house. And I lived there until he got cancer and was in a nursing home. So I went into a couple of other different apartments, and I just was not happy. And that's a good question. That's a good question, Marianne, because I wasn't happy. Connie Hughes, Debbie Smith Silver, myself, we went to Kansas City one weekend for a Native American retreat. And we stayed at Paul and Pam Wilson's house, slept on the hardwood floor, but we did it because we were young. You know, you could do things like that then. When we came back, Connie and I both, for a solid week, had these dreams that we were supposed to move to Independence. So I went to Connie and I told her about it, and she said, you know what? I had the same dream. So we decided, that's it. We're gonna pack up our stuff and put it in her little Toyota car, Corolla. I mean, it was tiny. You're just crammed up in this back seat. And her mom and dad brought, I think they had a pickup truck. They put some of the stuff in the truck. And we found us an apartment in Independence, and we moved down there. And Connie, I don't know if any of you remember Glenn Hughes. He was very devout and strict in his religion. You prayed, you studied the Bible every single day, morning and night. It was God-fearing. You had to do it. I was like, okay. So Connie and I, we shared a one-bedroom apartment, and that was different for me to share a bed with someone. I was like, okay. I worked 3 part-time jobs. Connie found a job at the J.C. Penney's warehouse in Lenexa, and I was, we were living in Independence. And I had 3 part-time jobs, and that's where I really learned how to drive, was Kansas City rush hour traffic. And I was like, whoa, whoa. However, when I went to LA the first time, it was 10:30 at night, and I'm driving a van full of MRDD young adults, and 10:30 at night, and I was like, this is like Kansas City rush hour. I was not expecting that, because at 10:30 at night I thought everybody'd be asleep. That was another story. In Independence, as I indicated, Connie and I, we were very devout to praying, to studying the scriptures. We couldn't quite find the church congregation we were comfortable in, but we would travel around, and at that time, every other block had a church on it in Independence. I mean, they were everywhere. You had your choice. And there was no businesses open on Sundays. Remember that? Oh my gosh, that was wild. We always had to remember to make sure that there was this little store called a Milk Jug, and it was drive-through only on, I think it was on 23rd Street. Yes. And we'd drive through there, and that's where we got our milk on Sunday. Other than that, you couldn't go anywhere else. And then I think it was after 2 o'clock in the afternoon or something like that. Anyway, I am deviating. As I indicated, prayer and studying the scriptures was very important at that time. Connie had done her devotions, and she had gone to bed one night. I am sitting on the couch, and our couch faced the front door of our apartment. While I'm studying, and to this day I wish I could remember what it was I was studying in the Bible, and I was doing my prayers, I was not asleep, but a figure came through the door. And it was a black figure, and it was a man. Came right through the door, and I am screaming, or I think I'm screaming at the top of my lungs, get out of here, get out of here, and it just keeps coming closer and closer and does not say a word. I finally started praying really, really hard, God, because I didn't feel good about this figure that was coming through the door. And it disappeared. I went in and I was like, Connie, why aren't you awake? And she was out like a light. She was just sound asleep. I thought for sure she would have heard me yelling. know I wasn't asleep. At that time, Connie and I were so strapped for money that we were only allowed to call home once a month. And I broke that promise, and I called my dad. And I told him what happened. And he said, Laura, you know what that was, don't you? I said, no, Dad. He said, that was the devil. And I'm like, wait a minute. I'm in Zion. That's not going to happen. I'm praying, I'm studying, I'm being a good girl. This is not happening to me. I went to a friend whose name was Wilson. I wish I could remember his first name. I can't remember it right now. He owned a garage in Inglewood, I think it was, and was a church member. And he said, Laura, I told him what happened. He says, you need to be ministered to. I said, okay. And this is a 3-day period. I mean, I was so devastated. I couldn't work. I mean, I was sick to my stomach. I was so upset about what was going on. And it was in January, and there was an ice storm. And I went to the house where I was supposed to meet the elder, and he was teaching a priesthood class. And it happened to be a priesthood class with David Brock, with President Vesey, now President Vesey's, and a couple other gentlemen. I can't remember who they were, but they're sitting in this priesthood class, and they're in their suits and ties on the living room couch during this priesthood meeting, or learning how to be priesthood, their introduction to scriptures, their first time calling. And I was like, wow. And I just felt a certain presence about them. I had never met these gentlemen before. They did an administration. And after that administration, of course, I had tears running down my cheeks, and I felt lifted. I felt a peace suddenly and a happiness. But it was what happened to the gentleman that was doing the elder that was doing the administration, that I will never forget. And that gentleman took his hands off of my head and looked at his hands, and he said that they were on fire with the Spirit of God, and that you just affirmed to me, Laura, that women will be in the priesthood. And this is in 1977. It might have been 70. Jan, what year did you graduate college?
78.
78. So it might have been January of 78. But there was an ice storm, and I remember driving down 23rd Street, and if any of you have been on Sterling and Chrysler, there's a few hills and there's an ice storm. I didn't care. I had the biggest smile on my face. And I remember telling my dad the next time I was allowed to call home and say, Dad, I didn't care. If somebody hit me that day, I didn't care, because I felt so good filled with the Spirit of God within me. I was like, wow. I was given the opportunity to work with Paul and Pam Wilson. They were church members. They were managing a group home for MRDD. At that time it was called MRDD, but we call it now developmentally disabled young adults who, we had one girl who was schizophrenic, a couple of Down syndromes, some others that were borderline 90 IQ, right in that range. We were teaching them basic living skills so that they could live in an apartment. They could have a job and be a part of society and make a difference in the world. Absolutely loved it. I met a gentleman there, his name was James Hayden, and everybody laughed because our names were so close, Hayden. And James and I really hit it off. We even talked of marriage. It was just kind of flirting with it. And about that time, my other roommate, Connie Hughes, well, I kind of regress. At that time, we'd moved into the house, Connie Hughes, Joan Wilson. Connie got married. I was without another roommate, and Grandma Blakesley, Marge Blakesley, calls me and says, my Uncle Mitch has a girlfriend, and would you be interested in having her come live with you? And that was Miss Jan. That's where I had met our beautiful Jan. However, even though I had just bought a brand new bed with my tax money in March or April of that year, I can't remember what it was, I was never at home. So I never really got to see Jan. I think, probably maybe once a month I'd come home, something like that. Because at my job, I didn't have to live there 24/7, but I chose to so I could be closer to James. Yeah, I have to admit that now. Plus, I became a workaholic. I decided I was teaching. I remember going to Gladstone congregation on a Sunday morning, and I had to teach swimming lessons at noon at the Holiday Inn. Well, there wouldn't be enough time with church getting out at noon for me to get a change of clothes and get to church. And I would wear my swimming suit with my overalls over my swimming suit. Now granted, I was about 200 pounds less than I am now, but I would wear that to church. And I did that 3 Sundays in a row. And it happened to be on Communion Sunday, we had a guest speaker from World Church, and I can't remember who it was. And I didn't care because God doesn't care what I am dressed in. However, I was politely asked, to refrain from wearing my swimming suit under my overalls and not wearing overalls to church. I stopped going to that congregation. Isn't that sad?
Yes.
Very sad. So I kind of stayed away from church for a while because James was Baptist. I thought, well, maybe I need to change my faith. All of a sudden, James kind of what we call now ghosting for 2 weeks. I was like, he broke our dates, he broke our dinner arrangements, he broke our anything that we were doing together. I was like, what is going on with him? And Paul Wilson sat me down in the office and he said, Laura, I just want you to know, you hear it from me first, that James has a girlfriend, another girlfriend. And within an hour or so, James called me there at work and he told me, he says, by the way, I met one of my friends from Sunday school. She is back from college and we met at church and we're getting married. I was like, whoa, wait a minute, what happened here? So, and about that same time, Miss Jan got married. I believe that was in May. And so Joni, the other roommate, she had gotten married. So I was suddenly in this house with no roommates, and it's like, I don't know, what was our rent, 180 a month or 150 a month? And I was like, oh, I don't know if I could afford this because I had just bought myself a new car, and I'm like, okay. Anyway, I met on a blind date. Connie Hughes introduced me to a gentleman named Jay Dennemine. She did not want us to hook up. It was just simply a dinner date, and that was it. But we hooked up, I met his family, and I fell in love with, I thought with him, but it was really with his money.
Not so bad.
Because his mom, when he introduced me to his folks, they were absolutely beautiful people, just joyous, loving, Jewish family that I just adored till the day they died, and I still admire some of the things that Harriet Dennebein taught me and gave to me spiritually. She was a jewel, and it didn't matter that she'd say, sometimes I wish I wasn't Jewish because I really like that Billy Graham. She loved watching Billy Graham on TV. So anyway, but this family, when I was first introduced, I was like, holy cow, they had 2 maids. They had family that lived in Mission Hills with maids, live-in maids. And I was like, wow, this little farm girl from Iowa that was
Yeah.
grew up not really poor, but there were times that we wondered about where our food was going to come from. So anyway, I met him and we got married and we were together for 6 years. We moved to Lexington, Kentucky. I want to say one thing before I did that. When I was talking about living in independence, that story about the devil visiting me, shortly after that, I had a dream about the end of the world, about us all going into the gates of heaven. But my gates of heaven, if any of you remember what Blue Ridge Mall used to look like, it was those doors. In my dream, we were going into Blue Ridge Mall, and I was trying really hard to get into those doors. It was really hard to get into those doors, but I just barely made it into those doors. And when I got in there, I'm looking around at all these people, and Glenn Hughes is not there. Mary Hughes is not there. Connie Hughes is not there. And I'm thinking, where are these people? We're in heaven. Why aren't they here? And I remember telling Mary Hughes about that story, and she said something to me that you don't know everything that goes on in one's life, Laura. I thought, oh, that's interesting. But when I walked through those doors, it wasn't Blue Ridge Mall that I saw. It was what the inside of the temple in Independence looks like. I had no idea. At that time in 77, 76, 77, we hadn't built the temple yet. So when I first went through the temple, they had an open house. It wasn't completed yet. And because I was living down there, I was able to, the opportunity to go through it. And I looked at the sanctuary and I went, oh my gosh, this was in my dream. And then later they put up white drywall around these curved things for sound and that sort of thing. I was like, no, that wasn't in my dream. The other part was. I thought that was interesting. So anyway, I had met, I met Jay, and I contracted meningitis. It was going around Kansas City at that time, and I was the seventh and last, thank goodness, person to get meningitis. I was very fortunate to not really have any side effects other than I have a lot of neck issues, and we don't know if that's part of it or not, but it's there. As I indicated, Jay and I were together. Whoops, we lost the sound.
Turn it up. Did you turn it off?
That's possible.
There's a switch here, just throw it straight up.
Yeah, it's up. Yeah, it's up. Yeah, it's up. But it's off. The battery's dead. There's no light.
Operation Dale.
Operation Dale. There we go.
You can keep going.
I'll talk real loud. What do I say?
Talk about just meeting.
Right. Jay and I, we got married. We moved to Lexington, Kentucky. While there, I discovered a lot about the world, and one of them was that there was this thing called the KKK. Now, my husband was Jewish. I was, at that time, RLDS. We did not have a church building. We met at a community center. And at that community center, okay, very good. Thank you, Dale. Thank you, Paul. I did not go every Sunday to church, but I went probably about once a month. While there, I loved the scenery of Kentucky. Beautiful, beautiful. However, they did not like women to be outspoken and I love to speak out. I was not quiet. I believed in the rights of MRDD at that time. And in the state of Kentucky, they believed that the MRDD adults needed to be institutionalized. I lobbied and I lobbied and I lobbied against that. I remember sitting in one of the congressman's or senator's, state senator's office in Fayette, at the Capitol, and he said, "Now, honey, it's okay. We've done this for over 150 years, and we'll just keep on doing it." And I knew right then, this was a lost battle. And about that time, my husband and I, we loved to go on weekend trips. We loved hiking, which if you saw him now, you wouldn't believe that. But yeah, at that time, we loved hiking. And we would go on these dirt roads. That was one thing Grandma Blakesley taught me, was dirt roads and mud roads are the place to go. That's where the fun is. And we enjoyed doing that. And one night we were coming back and we were on some little no-named road. We didn't have GPS back then. All you had was where the sun was setting and rising in maps. And we saw in the woods fire after fire after fire after fire after fire. And I said, well, that's interesting. They're having a campfire. They must be having a camp, a church camp maybe. And my husband looked at me and he said, really, Laura? I said, we're getting out of here now, because he was Jewish. He said, we're getting out of here now, and then you saw the white robes. I was like, okay. My friend that I really enjoyed talking to owned the gas station. I think it was Sinclair gas station. He just treated me like I was his daughter, and I just really enjoyed being with him. And I came to find out that he was the higher up in the KKK, and I was like, nope, I just lost that friendship. I couldn't understand that. And they bragged about the last person that they hung in Fayette County, or whatever county Lexington was in, I can't remember now. And I was like, what? You have all of these beautiful Quakers, these communities of Quakers, of Baptists. I just couldn't understand that. My husband and I, we continued on with our life, and things were slowly going downhill with our relationship. I'd caught him in 2 different affairs, and I remember going to church and talking to the elders about it, and they said that, I said, how many times would Jesus forgive him? How many times do I need to forgive him? And I finally decided 3 times. I said, that's it, that'll be it. 2 weeks before we were to move to Raleigh-Durham, North Carolina area, he had just accepted a new job there. I got accepted to Duke University, to their nursing school, and I was on cloud 9. To be accepted to Duke, this poor little uneducated girl, I was just amazed. I just remember looking at that letter and I kept saying it, showing it to Jay, and I said, does this really say I was accepted? Does this really say I'm accepted? And I was so excited with it. We packed up the house. We were living out of suitcases, and 2 weeks before we were to move, I catch him in his 3rd affair. And I said, that's it. I'm filing for legal divorce. We're going down. We filed for legal divorce. And I told him, I said, you have got to take me out to the best restaurant in town every day for the next 2 weeks. I said, that's part of the deal, because this is a happy, joyous time. And he's like, what? But it was because I suddenly realized I had married him for love and for money and not for love. So he went on to Raleigh-Durham, and he filed for divorce instead of his dad convinced him to file for divorce and paid for his divorce instead of legal separation. So I packed up my stuff and put it in a U-Haul, drove my little Bobcat, which was like a Pinto, with this great big gigantic U-Haul on the back that was at least 2 or 3, Dad said it was at least 3 times bigger than what it should have been. And I hauled my stuff to Leon, Iowa, break down in St. Louis, my muffler falls off, and this guy, and it's 4th of July weekend no less, and of course you can't find any place to fix it. And part of the deal with the separation was that I would get to keep my Sears credit card. Because I told him, I said, well, at least I can get my car fixed at Sears. You know, back then you could go to Sears for everything. So they just wired it up. I said, well, can't you at least wire it up? And they wired it up, and I doozy on home, and I get off the interstate, and I'm on one of the highways coming north-south, not quite to the Iowa border yet in Missouri. And I'm going over 70 miles an hour. I think back then, wasn't the speed limit 55? Probably. And this highway patrol officer, he comes by and he goes like this. And I was like, oh, yep, I'm going too fast. Better slow down. So I slowed down so I could make it home. There, my folks said that I could stay there for the summer. I thought, okay, I could get my life back in order. I was very fortunate that Lamoni let me come to the reunion, and I taught one of the classes for the kids at reunion. And it helped me get me back on my spiritual path where I needed to be. I worked for a short while as a director at the MRTD in Creston, Iowa. I was a live-in, or not a live-in, I had a little apartment, studio apartment, but I was the manager of the men's home. And there, taught them a lot. They were very 1950-ish, and I brought them up to date on what and how teaching these young gentlemen, get them out in the world, get them out in the community, make them a part of the community. I then ended up having a total hysterectomy and found a job at the same time. 4 weeks later, went down to Independence again because my mother told me. I told her, I said, I wanted to marry a farmer. I wanted to marry somebody like John Rippey, and I was going to be a farmer in Leon. I was not going to go back to the city. And I remember standing at the clothesline with my mom, helping her get the clothes off the line, and she said, you're going to Independence. And I'm like, no, I'm not, Mom. And she said, yes, you are. You need to go back to Kansas City, the Independence. I was like, okay. So I did what my mom said, and I got a job in Independence, was a manager, a live-in manager for a girls' group home, which was very interesting because they definitely had their girls in the 1950s. They could not go out of the house without hose, a dress, and shoes on. And this is in 1985. 86, somewhere in 85, somewhere in there, 86. I think it was 86, somewhere in there. She, the manager of the entire agency, his secretary, the social worker, 2 other staff members, they all decided the same day that they were going to turn in their resignation because that's how bad they could not get this board to change their minds about allowing these young women and young men to grow into the community and be up to date. They wanted them to be those little, they weren't an institution in their minds, but they wanted them to be little dolls. And even playing baseball, they had to wear their shoes, their heels. They weren't allowed to wear shorts. They had to wear long pants. Baseball? I'm like, yeah, sure. That wasn't going to happen. They asked me, I remember him asking me, Laura, we're leaving. We need you to come with us. And I said, no, I need to fight this board. We need to change. They have got to change it. I just knew in my heart that I could change these guys. They left. A new manager came on board for the agency. And one of our girls, one of our young ladies, she was Down syndrome. Her mother was president of the board. She got mad at me because she lost her right to go shopping. I was going to take her to the mall, Blue Ridge Mall, to go shopping, and she got mad at me, came at me with a knife with the intentions of killing me because I would not allow her to go shopping. Well, she had done something that she wasn't supposed to, and she lost her right to do that. So I was standing by my guns. They admitted her to a psych ward there at the Independent Sanitarium. I think it was called Independent Center at that time. I can't remember what it was for sure. And during that time, it came out, she accused me of raping her. And I still remember sitting there on the steps of that house, this 4-story house, thinking, what am I going to do? How can I prove this? And I remembered that every time that I was with this girl, I had a rule. I had to have another adult with me. And I was so glad that I did, because Janelle was able to testify in my behalf to the board, and they soon realized that what was happening was she was being molested by her brother every time she went home for weekends. And she was mad at me for not letting her go shopping, so that kind of changed some things. With that, I was asked to either resign or they would fire me, so I resigned. And was devastated because I loved working with the MRDDs. Absolutely loved it. Went into retail, I was a manager trainee for Hancock Fabrics. 3 stores in Kansas City, Overland Park, Grandview, and Independence. Worked 60, 70-hour weeks. I got to work at 8:30 in the morning and I left at 10 at night. 6 days a week. So they were long, long days. My roommate at that time was Kathy Courtney. She and I had known each other since 3rd grade. We later became roommates for 11 years. She invited me to stay with her when I lost my job. So it was all perfect timing. I started visiting different congregations, trying to find the church that I wanted to go to. At that time, we ended up moving to Overland Park, or to Lenexa, because Hartford Insurance moved their headquarters, their office, not their headquarters, but their office for that region to Overland Park. She convinced me to stop retail and go to work in the insurance world, where I worked for 32 years as handling catastrophic workers' compensation claims. Yes, that's a big word, catastrophic. That is your people who have got head injuries, spinal injuries, burns over most of their body, multiple broken bones, and death claims. God brought me to that place, and I can still remember how many times that people would ask me to do the funeral for their loved one, because of the way that I was able to communicate with them and with their family, yet still keep my workplace. And of course, that was a conflict of interest, and I wasn't able to do that, but it was still an honor to be asked that. I started going to a congregation called Mission Road Congregation in Prairie Village, Kansas. Wow. That's where I met some awesome people. Bruce Darrington was the pastor at that time, and he was paid. He brought me under, and I don't know if anyone of you know Bruce Darrington, but he's probably Stu's height, maybe taller. He's really, really tall. Took me under his wing, literally, and I saw a whole new world. I met Kenitha Cutler. She goes by Kenny Cutler, and some of you might know her if you were in the singles groups. I also met Galen Worthington. He was, first time I shook hands with him, I was introduced, I shook hands, and I had this electric shock go through my hands. That was wild. I was like, who is this person? And it's like God was telling me something about this man. And we became so close that we actually talked of marriage, but I never let him meet my family. I'm not sure what was wrong with that. But he was working on his 3rd or 4th master's at the time, and that may have been part of it. He was definitely more intellectual than my family was used to, and I guess maybe I wasn't quite there yet with him. But we both did supplemental evangelistic blessings. He had his at the temple, and I had mine also at the temple. Mine was during a beautiful snowstorm, great big flakes of snow coming down onto that peace garden, and it just, it was phenomenal. Brother Blue was the evangelist who taught me something, and he said the same things that Clarence Bohall said, and that was to study and pray. And this time it meant something. It really did. It brought a sense of peace to me. It brought a sense of where I was supposed to go, the direction. Galen and I, we even, like I said, we talked about marriage, and we finally decided we were better off as brothers and sisters. We were more like brothers and sisters. However, if we were still single at the age of 65, we would get married. I got married, he did not. He still is single. During that time, I was the Central Field singles leader for a year. This was a volunteer position. Oh my gosh, folks. Holy cow. The pain that was with those singles. Some of them were just joyous, but some of them were so full of pain. And I wouldn't get to bed till 1, 2 o'clock in the morning because they were always calling. We didn't have email and text back then. It was, I'd go to work, and I remember telling my supervisor, I was so glad to be at work. And she'd say, why? And I said, because here, I know what I'm doing, but the singles leader was really weighing on me. All these people who had been through such frustrations and torments to their bodies and minds. One of the things that I did was the blue jean story, and I have to share this from a spiritual standpoint. I laid a pair of blue jeans on the edge of the foot of my bed, and every night I'd pat those blue jeans and I'd say, okay, God, I'm ready for you to fill those blue jeans because I need a husband. And my girlfriend, Kenitha, she did it. My other girlfriend, Patty, she's now Patty Harvey, she did it. And Patty got designer pants, and she got a designer husband out of the deal. I was too cheap to buy a pair of blue jeans. It wasn't just cheap, I was like, what if I buy a pair of men's jeans and then nobody comes into my life and I've wasted this money? So I got a pair of my own jeans and put them on the... No, I got a wonderful man out of the deal. Anyway, what I wanted to get to on the spiritual end of that was, after 2 weeks, nothing happened. Nothing happened. I'm like, okay, a month goes by. Nothing's happening. I keep telling God, God, fill these jeans. Hurry up and fill these jeans. And suddenly it dawned on me, I was telling God what to do instead of saying, God, it's in your hands. When I did that, within 2 weeks, I met my husband. We fell in love immediately, and we wanted to get married within that first week, and we knew that that was not right. Our parents, here we are, he's 42 and I'm 40. He's retired Air Force, and we knew our parents still wouldn't agree with that. They think we were way off the deep end. And so, but we waited 9 months, and we got married at Mission Road Congregation. It was a wonderful time. I realized I married for love and not for money. And my husband promised me he would come to church with me every time I spoke. During that time, I'd also been called to the office of priest first, and then later up in Sioux City elder. But he promised me he would always come to church with me. Do you see him here now? He was here for Jan's ordination, and he comes for special occasions. And Jan is very special to our family, and he was very pleased with that.
Does he come when you speak in the sanctuary?
No. He will not. The question was, does Jim come when I speak in the sanctuary? And the answer to that is no. He says that he would be a distraction. And I keep telling him that what?
What rank was he in the Air Force?
He was a master sergeant when he retired.
The major, I can give him orders.
There you go. We'll have Rich give him orders. Anyway, going on to this, I volunteered when we were living in Independence at the temple. I was a receptionist, I was a guide, met a lot of wonderful people that helped develop my own spiritual development, including Mark Easter's mom. She was very helpful in that as well. I got an offer to go to handle catastrophic work comp claims for truckers only out of Sioux City at Great West Casualty. We took that, we moved to Sioux City. It was all perfect timing. God had a reason for us to be there. I was brought under the wing of Dr. Tim Ballard, Sioux City. He was a cardiologist, went to Nebraska University, and was in fact, he's very good friends with Jim Doty and his wife, the Dotys. He did my calling for elder as well as to pastor of Sioux City. And I could not have been a pastor if it hadn't been for an organization called Toastmasters International. Because Toastmasters International not only teaches you how to speak in public, but they teach you how to be a leader that makes a difference. And it was with that Spirit of God and Toastmasters that I was able to both work a 60-hour job and also be a pastor. After a few years of doing that, I finally had to drop out of being a pastor, and I felt like I was leaving God behind. I have an experience that happened with 9/11. I'm going to share it real quick because it was a turning point also in my faith. A week before 9/11 happened, my husband and I, we had a TV in the bedroom. And we were laying there, and that was one of our things we did. It was our cuddle time. And we were laying there cuddled up watching TV, and all of a sudden I said, there's going to be an earthquake in New York. And I could hear, and I could feel, and I could still see this in my mind's eye, these people yelling and screaming and falling, and dirt and dust and everything, smoke. And I thought it was an earthquake. And I said, it's going to happen on 9/11. Or 9/10, I said 9/10. And on 9/10, we stayed up purposely till after midnight, and nothing happened. And I was so relieved until I woke up the next morning. And we all know what happened on 9/11. And to this day, I still have guilt. I know it's stupid to have that guilt. What difference could have I have made? They probably would, FBI thought I was crazy probably. But I got so mad at that voice. I was always blessed with having this voice in my head that would tell me things that were going to happen in the future. And I was so mad at that voice that I said, get out of my head. And it did. For the next 9 months, I did not go to church. My voice was gone, and I realized that voice was God. Slowly it came back, and I'm very grateful that voice came back and that I listened to it. One of the things that I also did was I loved making jewelry. Grandma Blakesley, Marge Blakesley, and we can pass this around, she was a silver craftsman. My Grandpa Veer, he made this necklace I have on. And when he made this necklace, he did such a good job on this turquoise necklace that Grandma decided she didn't need to make jewelry anymore, because Grandpa was making better jewelry than her, and I think she was jealous. You know, in fact, I know she was jealous. That was just Grandma Marge. But I started making jewelry, started selling it at craft shows. My husband was always upset because we were going in the hole every year. One year I made a profit of $32. I was so excited. COVID came along and I was working from home, and while I was working from home, I wrote a children's book, which has not been, here, Stu, I'll let you have this passed around. It has not been published because I found out to publish a book, it costs a fortune. It's ridiculous. I also wrote a cookbook with recipes of my mom, and the family members all have that.
Did you do the drawings?
It was through the computer, yes I did. Yeah.
Okay.
So 9/11 brought a lot of things creativity-wise to me, because I went to a paint party. And at that paint party, well, it was prior to 9/11, or prior to COVID. 7 years ago, I went to a paint party, and that night, I had a dream that I needed to paint angels. I'm like, yeah, sure. I've never had an art class except for 6 weeks in junior high school. It's not gonna happen. At work the next day, I kept having this thought, Laura, you need to paint angels, you need to paint angels, you need to paint angels. I'm like, yeah, sure God, sure God, sure God. I got in the car when my husband picked me up to come home from work, and I said, God tells me that I'm supposed to be painting angels. And this is my husband, who is Mr. Frugal, who was already upset because I was spending so much money on making jewelry. I tell him, I said, God told me that I'm supposed to start painting angels, so we need to go to Michael's or Hobby Lobby so I can get paint supplies. He says, okay. He believed it. And that's why you have a painting there. It's my interpretation of what Christ and peace, and I thank you, Paul, for asking me to do that, because it was a challenge that I did not think I could do, and I can't tell you how many times I sent the picture to Jan and to my sister, who is an artist, and also to Paul, and said, Jesus looks like a caveman, I don't know what to do. And I sent it to my brother, and he said, well, just make his beard be more natural. It's supposed to fall down like this, not go out like this. And I was like, oh yeah, that's what happens with gravity. Yeah, that's right. So anyway, God has given me many a voice. His voice is back in my head, and I am very grateful for that. I am grateful for the times that I have been an elder and been called out to help people, whether it is physical, mental, or helping them with their financial needs. I am very grateful, and I'm grateful for the people in my life, as Miss Jan and each and every one of you. And that is where I am now. I am retired from handling any kind of insurance claims, and I can't tell you how many times my family has been doing things that I thought were unwise from an insurance standpoint. And I go, remember, I have my associate degree in insurance, you guys. I know it's just an associate, but anyway. So I thank each and every one of you for inviting me here today, Marion. Thank you. Thank you.